Hello friends, welcome to week 4. We're a third of the way done. Scary. Don't make me think about the work I have to do before that's over. Anyways, today we'll be discussing part 2. I know you've been waiting. Writing women's literary history. I liked reading this book quite a lot more than I thought I would. Because it gets to that point where I was talking about where we stop talking and start doing. This book was very good insight into the creation of literary canons and the female literary canon, and a lot of really practical examples of that. And I think that's the way it's going to benefit most. Specifically, this is about like pre-19th century and Restoration female writers, but so I'm not interested in those things. I just I'm not studying them explicitly, but it had a lot of really good stuff about how in the 16th to mid 18th century, women were characterized as part of the same intellectual spheres as men, and they were criticized and published kind of equally with them. But then in the 19th and mid 18th century, when they decided that women shouldn't do that anymore, they kind of revised this history of women's writing to not include the women that they deemed inappropriate and too defiant, and to create a picture of docile female authorship and lonely female authorship, specifically because most female writing before the 1700s was not published, and it was circulated just in literary circles, in critical circles. And it really made me think about fan fiction and how the same analysis could be used to study fan fiction, because there's multiple authors and this kind of notion of it being unpublished and just going through people for critiques. And someone could study that. I'm not going to, because I just don't think I care that much. I'm actually not the world's biggest fanfic celebrator. I think it's cool and I do read it, but I'm not the expert or the fanatic. Fanfic-fanatic. Anyways, I also reread Ozment's Rationale for Feminist Bibliography, which is the kind of main article that rationalizes the entire guess what? It rationalizes the entire field. It's called Rationale for Feminist Bibliography. I bet you weren't gonna expect that. Anyways, and I was struck rereading that and talking again about the literary canon, and she uses the canon of book history to critique the exclusion of women in book history. And I think that's kind of where I'm thinking of going, specifically in understanding the literary canon and the science fiction and fantasy canon and its exclusion of women. And on the subject of that, specifically, I was looking up stuff about Dragon Riders of Pern. We're back on it. I was looking up some stuff and then found source that was the top books, science fiction and fantasy books, the top 20 of each genre, as voted on for the Locus. Locus is a science fiction fantasy magazine, voted on by the readers in 1987, or that it might not have been voted, I don't remember. But particularly those two lists, the only women included on all of it, or there were 3 women included. Ursula K. Le Guin was the only one in the science fiction in 1987, and she was there twice. And then Anne McCaffery was in fantasy twice. Patricia McKillop was there once for the Riddle Master trilogy, and they were right on that one. And then Madeline, I don't know how to pronounce The Wrinkle in Time. I'm not gonna try. You know me and French. We don't get along. And just the fact that that list is so fucking telling, because it's not women weren't writing science fiction and fantasy in the years leading up to 1987. Like, they truly were. And they're some of my faves, but they're not reflected in this list at all. Not to mention people of color. I doubt they're in that list. I didn't do a deep dive, but I was like, this is very telling. Because there were people of color also writing science fiction and fantasy that was good. And so I'm like, looking at this list, I'm like, so where is Octavia Butler? Like, I realized some of her most popular works hadn't been published yet, but I was like, so where is she? So where is my girl Tamora Pierce? There was also a fascinating thing there where most of the science fiction books were adult, but then the fantasy books skewed towards young adult literature. That was fascinating to me. So where's Tamora Pierce? If you're gonna include young adult books on that list, you know, there's just so many random books that I have read that I think could be included that like no one else has even heard of this book. Some of the books I've read, and when I look them up, there's like almost nothing on them, and I'm like, this is a good book. Well, why hasn't anyone ever read any of these books before? That being said, that's why I'm doing a thesis on it. Yes. And just really thinking about literary canons has been my train of thought this week. Fascinating, I know. But that's gonna be it for today. Thank you. Goodbye.